Hello and welcome to another modeling video. This is Alan from the Makona Man at YouTube with another garage kit build video. Sculpted by Musashiya 15 and cast by E2046. This is the 1/5 scale Naru from the older anime Love Hina, which will be a mass nostalgia trip for the majority of you clicking on. First step was collecting reference material, as I wasn't a big fan with the E2046 reference picture and vied for the original creator's rendition, which went closer in line with official artwork and box art to the DVD from my memory. Plaid skirts are not an issue for me. In my research, I found an amazing reference website, My Figure Collection, covering old GK kits. This one came in 2001 at 16,000 yen. This unboxing is covering a 2019-2018 by E2046. This is a recast, original paperwork photocopied. The instructions and artwork is far more detailed and comprehensive than other kits I've worked in the past, very easy to follow. The hand drawing is a very nice touch. Instead of distribution at events, more focused for international shipping, so the packaging is top notch with decent quality checks. The casting I'm very happy with any nub removal, cleaning and scribing. We'll polish up this piece for a collector or hobbyist alike without any issue. No breakage or imperfections such as bubbles or fitting problems. A very satisfying purchase. Parts have appropriate anchorage for snapping and gluing together, with pin marks already in for further drilling and adding rods. Sprue points are very obvious. The material is quite soft and removes easily. Small parts count at 16 bits, which isn't too bad for a beginner, but gets more problematic for color separating. It is only 2 colors per part, so masking is required, and a project and girl this big is very easy to do without too much issue. The only problematic part being the hand and the torso, which will need filling. The model also does not contain any eye waterslide decals, not a big deal as it's large enough to easily paint on. Maybe an intermediate figure and not ideal for beginners. I started by removing all the nubs first according to the instructions, and further drilling the pin guide line holes and putting steel wire inside for a test pit. It is very heavy and large, though being on its knees it holds together with no glue easy enough. The skirt is extremely thin but still at about 2 to 3 mil and enough to fit a small pin inside. The hair is very rich in detail and come in multiple parts. It was just simply super glued on top with a noticeable gap, nothing filling putty can't fix. I did have concerns of the weight of the hair, but apparently after assembly the resin is equally distributed in a way that it's able to stand under its own weight and strength without the aid of a base. The design is incredibly retro, which appeals to the period of the anime and style. The sculpt of the body is questionable, with a very funny anatomy at some angles, but the idea of the assets is to be as arousing and appealing from other angles. Considering the quality and the sculpt of anime figures, soft vinyl and GK the period, this would have been a premium back then. A nice touch is the overly exaggerated folds in the clothing, which makes it quite interesting and a joy to paint. Like a tabletop miniature aesthetic. For the hard assembly, I've decided to use super glue and not deal with a nasty post-paint seam around the lower half of the body, which is covered by the skirt, and not too much need in being neat. I've decided to glue it in all one piece, paint it flesh, and just paint the panties at a later state by hand. Sanded all the smooth and plain details with a range of wet and dry automotive sandpaper, from 200 grit all the way down to a polished 1000 grit. This is for bite in gluing, putty and paintwork. Resin in liquid, gas or powder form is an irritant and carcinogen. Do wet sanding or wear a respirator. The most effective and popular filling putty on resin is polyester putty, either Tamir or Mori Mori. I have experimented with large bulk automotive putty. It's a bit intimidating and has a very strong odor and fumes, being resin base itself. You mix a tiny amount of hardener to a large amount of the filler, and it gives you about half an hour of work time with a 12 to 24 hour full chemical or set time. It does get dry to the touch within an hour or so. I used food grade plastic film wrap to cover one surface as to create a closed seam, which would be sanded and painted at a later day and not allow the putty to stick on both surfaces. This sandwiching technique worked out quite well, and it's very smooth and easy to sand the following day. Applicator with Q-tip. With a little practice, it's not too hard to use, but can be a bit tricky to find and expensive. Regarding the manufacture and resin casting process, resin is poured in a silicone mold, and not to stick to any material, they use a release agent, which can be some oil-based lubricant or worse, silicone-based. Paint doesn't like to stick onto it, and most resin garage kit manufacturers don't wash their parts. There is talks of E2046 who does do a wash. But with this particular boxing, I found the paint to separate in a couple of parts after the priming process, which required a second round of cleaning, sanding and a re-priming. Painting is a bit tricky, but not impossible. The heaviest parts I had to do by hand and paint 2 halves, allowing to dry. The smaller parts would be attached to alligator clips where the steel pinning rods are located. Excluding the hair, most parts are color separated, so I can hold on to one half and paint the second half, excluding primer. Not a big deal at all. Had a reoccurring issue of constantly scraping the paint or primer off the knees. I just left that blank until the whole project was done, sanded it, and did a final paint on the knees, allowing it to dry. This is the fisheye I was talking about, but I also had a split seam from not sufficient filling. This was neatened up on top of the primer using Mr. Dissolved putty. Polishing that up came out nice and perfect. Besides these little issues, it polished up all quite nicely and all the details showed through sufficiently, and it's a really good sculpt and whatnot. It was all sanded down back to base resin in case there's any weak points after masking, and re-sprayed with automotive grade filler primer from Super Cheap Auto, thinned with lacquer thinner via a 0.5mm airbrush. Besides seams and where I had to do heavy sanding, I just gave everything a base coat of automotive white paint to start building up light colours and flesh to save a bit of time. I bought my white paint in a 1 litre tub, allowing for enough product to use and layer as many coats as I desire. The torso needed one more sanding session before it was ready for painting, and it looked smooth. The midriff is a focus of interest, and I wanted to look fairly flawless, so that took quite a bit of care. The first section is hair. Now, when choosing colours, anime does gravitate to really bright and vibrant colours. Choosing hair can be a bit tricky, so I used earthy military tones. Moving to the skirt, it was multiple layers, each layer with 3 shades, using a range of masking tapes I had to get the plaid effect and building up over a matter of days. The flesh is 3 tones Mr. Hobby on top of Gaia Note bulk flesh to flesh it out and give highlights and more shadowy tones around the armpits and folds into the flesh. The final section painted was the t-shirt, going for a very dark earthy tone and building up a white and a very light white on the highlights. Going back to the reference material, I hated the metallic look dress and shirt and went for the box art like the original. In the last second, I swapped the white t-shirt out for the yellow t-shirt, which is very iconic to Naru, and I want to remember that image every time I look at it. The eyes were hand painted very slowly with overly thinned paint, doing the outline and colour it in, looking at reference material quite closely, allowed it to sit and chemically harden for a few weeks to prevent paint chipping and handling. With PVA glue, I slathered it in between the joints and clamped it down together to hold the skirt in place. Masking tape was put on and left it alone for overnight. 10 to 15 years ago, I bought a garage kit, an original one, and always intimidated to paint or do anything with it. I would collect Dengeki and Hobby Japan magazines, looking at many tutorials, painting guides, and on light, but still never pulled the trigger until I could find really affordable stuff. If you come from gunpla or scale modeling, it's sort of like learning a whole new hobby from scratch. It's a completely different mindset and skill set, even if you've done military or other style of resin modeling, including tabletop. Flesh, eyes, color, and balance is some of the hardest ones, though with about 4 or 5 under your belt, work on something easy and simple that you're not attached to, then the characters you really like. And I feel confident now that I'm doing stuff that I thoroughly like and definitely want to show off and put almost my own touch or small modification, color choice, or even scheme. This one came out as well as my last one, and would say it's up there with better pieces as just general scale modeling and my garage kits modeling or anime figure modeling altogether. Very happy, and the kit is not too bad. If you have a couple under your belt, it's very worthwhile trying and having a crack at it. There's nothing too challenging, just taking your time and the mental gymnastics of solving some of the problems that this kit does bring to the table. All that done, thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. All the references and links in the description section down below. Catch you guys next time. See you later.